Okay, sorry, I was muted. Hello. Okay. We will start again. So yes, we are going to be. Luckily, I caught that early. So we are going to be discussing the partial welfare U-turn, which is not a complete U-turn. But what has changed? What has not changed? And will it be enough to get the welfare bill through next week? And ultimately, because there's a lot of discussion on this, what needs to happen to stop these unforced errors happening in future? I see we've got Joe in the chat, so no doubt he will have some things to say. So in terms of what has happened, so first of all, let's just look at what this U-turn is. In pure financial terms, just to give a sense of the scale of it, the original plan would have made savings of up to, I believe, about £5 billion a year. Now, that I think was going to be about £8 billion for this Parliament, because remember, not all of the changes were due to come in immediately. Some of them were going to be a couple of years away. But once they were all implemented, it would have resulted in what is believed to be savings of £5 billion a year. Now it's going to. So what I've just seen, the Resolution Foundation have suggested that the U-turn will cost £3 billion a year. So I suppose that's a net saving of £2 billion. So there's still cuts. There's still cuts here. So what's actually happened? So as far as I can tell, correct me if I'm wrong, those who know more, anyone who is currently in receipt of personal independent payments will continue to get them while their circumstances remain. So, in other words, the new tighter qualification procedure will not apply to people who have already qualified. And the additional up rates, the universal credit up rate, will also increase in line with inflation. So as far as I can tell, anyone who currently is in receipt of disability payments, I think, will continue to get them as they would have expected to before all this nonsense. However, yes, Paul is there saying we need to fight for those who need the new PIP claims. So yes, so this is the very ugly side of it now, because there will be new assessment, tighter assessment criteria for new claimants. Now, I don't know if there's been a suggestion that they are going to look at that as well. In other words, will that be relaxed a little bit? Because I still have a bit of an issue with someone who, like, if people came out with examples of people who were in receipt of PIP, and you look at it and you think, well, you know, they don't really need that money. But if you're talking about people who can't cook for themselves, or they can't, like, clean themselves properly without help, then that's ridiculous, isn't it? Are we about to get a huge surge in new claimants in the next year trying to beat the changes? Well, I mean, that wouldn't help, would it? Because there's still a process to be able to claim. So no, I don't, you know, if you can't have a sudden. This isn't like introducing a tax change which can cause a lot of people to try and do something before the change comes into effect. You know, at the end of the day, it's based on your own circumstances. Either you qualify at the moment or you don't. You're not going to have people going, well, I qualify now, but I was going to put it off for a couple of years, are you? So no, I don't think there would be any surge as such. You know, people will claim them when there's only two conditions for wanting to claim them. One, if you believe that you qualify, and two, you know, if you are aware of that. So no, in terms of, I'm just going to come back to a comment that was posted right at the beginning, or at the beginning as I came into it, because I think this is really good and I wanted to tackle this as well. It says, maybe it's just my age, but why is Parliament doing its job in a representative democracy a loss for the executive? We aren't America. Politics is supposed to be the art of the possible. But I would say this. So this is Parliament doing what it's supposed to do. there is a lot of focus in the media on the fact, oh, this is. I even saw The Guardian, would you believe The Guardian, trying to suggest that this is as a result of Labour not doing very well. In fact, The Guardian seemed to be implying, when I read their analysis, and this was their formal analysis, not one of their, commentators, actually, their editorial analysis. They seem to suggest that if Labour were doing better, right, if they were doing better, that Starmer would have got through this and the rebellion wouldn't be there. And I don't believe that. I think these MPs, like, there are rebels in there, of course, and the rebels will always look for a chance to trip Labour up on anything. They don't care what it's about. But the 120 odd Labour MPs who basically made this impossible to pass, who did exactly what I would have done. I mean, people will know if you watch me for a while, I deplore mindless rebellions. As far as I'm concerned, if you want to stand under a party's ban, if you want to get elected, if you want the party machine, because you can stand as an independent. It doesn't cost to stand as an independent. It costs a few £100. It's nothing, right? If you want the party machine to elect you, then you accept the responsibility of that, which is basically you're going to toe the party line. But this was very different. No one going into the polling stations last July would have anticipated that a Labour government would do this. This was not something that was promised, but it also wasn't something you would expect. Because, a government does do things that it doesn't, its manifesto isn't a blueprint for every detail. There's stuff they do that wasn't there. But is it in line with their general offer? And this one was not. But this is what Parliament's supposed to do. The executive has made a mistake, and Parliament is going, well, no, we're sovereign. This is a mistake. Change it. And it's taken them too long. But this is what I said months ago. Months ago, it was about 50 Labour MPs rebelling. Why did it take this long for it to get as large as 120? It should have been months ago, and I'm going to say congratulations to these Labour MPs, by the way. I'm very happy they've done it. But if they'd have done this months ago, if they'd have got together a group of like 120 to 150 of them, and if they'd have gone to Keir Starmer and said, we will sink the entire bill, this isn't a threat, we will sink the entire bill if this goes through. If they'd have done that months ago, this could all have been sorted out before it got this damaging. But it is still less damaging to do this than to go further. Because, yes, the Tory press, basically everyone who's opposed to Labour on the left and the right and wherever, they're going to poke at this wound now for a while. But the wound will partially heal. Again, it's still not perfect. It's not great. But it will. Whereas if they'd have tried to ram this through, and let's say they'd have got it through, then that wound would fester, it'd carry on. Wangan Craig said, still seeing people blame this on Starmer Rees for being neoliberal, not really understand what the term really means. No, you get a lot of that. Let's look at blame then, because at the end of the day, if, Labour have now made several missteps. What are the major missteps they've made? The winter fuel allowance, politically speaking, was the biggest, because that pissed off pensioners, right? Even though that wasn't as serious a problem as this in terms of impact on poverty, it was a bigger political mess. They shouldn't. That should have been. I said at the time, I have no objection to means testing winter fuel allowance. I have no objection to means testing anything, as long as you set the level right. But I said at the time, this is a bold policy, because even I could see taking money off pensioners, even if they don't strictly need it. I mean, some do, but if the ones who don't. But I knew it was still a political hot potato. That was a misstep. This has been a misstep, because what they've done is they've thought to themselves, well, actually, most key voters will be in support of it, because most key voters resent the welfare. They resent everything to do with the DWP. Everything. Most key voters for Labour are actually working age, so they even resent the state pension. They won't do when they are pensioners, but right now they do. They resent any form of welfare payments because they don't get it. Because when you're thinking about who is your standard key voter, it's basically blokes in their 50s who are reasonably well off. not rich, but you know, they're all right. They don't have wealth. They don't need universal credit or anything. So they're people who are sort of reasonably well off. Also key voters for Labour. Yes, you've got younger people, but they also tend to be graduates these days, and they will oppose the moves on the basis that, particularly this one, it's letting like disabled people down, some of the most vulnerable people down, but they're not personally affected by it. So they will have imagined because their key voters aren't affected by it, it wouldn't be a political issue. But they're failing to understand that a lot of people in Labour, doesn't matter that it affects, like the thing is about being on the left, and I'm not going to try and pretend that the left are all cuddly and nice and everything, because there's some nasty people as well. But by and large, the motivation for wanting to pursue left-wing policies is a sort of collective wealth that people, you know, it's this, the standard saying is, in terms of public expenditure and taxation, from each according to their means, to each according to their needs. You know, that is the guiding philosophy on the left. And this works against it. It works against it. It's basically saying, look, we've got this hole in the budget and we're going to get disabled people to plug it up. I mean, if you're going to just means test it and say, look, a disabled person on like £80,000 a year or something doesn't need it, okay, you'd have got away with that. But, you know, people that are struggling. Can we expect a reorganisation of the number 10 Downing Street operation, bad comms and tone deaf to the impact of policies? Hopefully, yes. And there are MPs calling for it. I don't know how many. So let's look at the three key characters, right, in terms of blame. There are three people who all share responsibility for this. Keir Starmer, obviously, he's the leader. He's the Prime Minister. He could have gone, no, this is stupid, we're not doing it, right? So he's the boss. He takes ultimate responsibility. Second, Morgan McSweeney. Now, Keir Starmer, is, as people will have noticed, is not a political beast. He's really not a... he doesn't have strong political instincts. That's obvious. But the good thing is, unlike Kemi Badenoch, who also doesn't, is Keir Starmer recognises this. He understands it. He gets it, which is good, that he actually recognises his own blind spots. That is why he relies on Morgan McSweeney's advice. And he really does lean on it, and he goes with it almost uncritically. Now, that would work fine if Morgan McSweeney's political instincts were strong. But the problem is, Starmer has covered his blind spot with someone who's also blind, which is not good. Rachel Reeves is also responsible because ultimately if you think about the unpopular policies, so what have we got? Winter fuel allowance, these disability cuts, the way she changed inheritance tax, which still gives a tax break to the fake farmers whilst hitting real farmers. And what else was there? There's another one I'm forgetting. But basically, all of these have come from the Treasury. Try and think about it this way. Of the unpopular policies, of the policies that Labour are getting beaten up over, which ones have come from a department that wasn't the Treasury? I can't think of any. Okay, no, sorry, I'm wrong. Department for Health and Social Care blocking access to treatment for young trans people in particular. That's one. But by and large, the major political shitstorm has come from the Treasury. So of course Rachel Reeves is responsible. She's the one who has released these policies to number 10. But all of these policies go through number 10. Number 10. Think about the job of number 10 Downing Street, Keir Starmer's operation. What is Keir Starmer and his team's job? It's his job to I mean, first of all, the stuff he's doing on the world stage is really good. That's the job of the Prime Minister. He's been good at that. And that is why Labour MPs have been really clear. Even the rebels, not all of them obviously, but the vast majority have gone out of their way to say, this is not that we don't have confidence in Keir Starmer's leadership. They're saying we do have confidence in his leadership. We just don't like this thing. So actually, most Labour MPs don't have an issue with Starmer. They have an issue with the advice Starmer's getting. But the waspy women thing, I That's also come from the Treasury. I'm not sure that's turned out to be quite such. It may do, but at the moment it doesn't seem to be that big an issue. But yes, okay, that created some unpopularity as well. But it's also come from the Treasury. So yeah, Rachel Reeves is responsible for the fact that her political instincts didn't realise that these were bad moves. But this idea of Reeves needs to go, no, absolutely not. For two reasons. First of all, she is the most qualified Chancellor Labour could possibly put up. There is no one else. Someone else they put up. The Treasury is the Treasury, right? It's how the Treasury works. This is just the Treasury. What's supposed to happen, it is the Treasury's job and it is the Chancellor's job to fix the finances in the way that makes the most sense economically, right? So this is a failure of number 10, not number 11. It's not a failure of the Treasury. It's not a failure of Reeves, even though, yes, she has let these go through. The number 10 operation, it's their job. All policies go through them, ultimately. And it's their job to pick out the howlers. The ones that are like, yeah, this is going to lose us the next election, mate. You can't do this. That's their job, and they failed to do that. Now, I'm not having a bash at any of those three people. Keir Starmer, he's got the confidence of Labour MPs, and he's doing a really good job on the world stage. If you've got a different leader, you might get someone who also has bad advice, and they're shit on the world stage. So getting rid of Starmer, non-starter. The only people calling for that are people who don't support Labour, really. There's plenty of people calling for him to go. The only people I've seen saying it are people who are opposed to Labour, right? So when Labour's opponents are calling for the leaders to go, that's a pretty good sign that they should not go. Reeves, I've already just explained, shouldn't go because, these things will always come out of the Treasury. They will always come out of the Treasury. It's number 10's job to say no. Morgan McSweeney is more complicated. He's not fit for the job he's doing. That doesn't mean to say he should be sacked. Sue Gray was the right appointment, right? Sue Gray was a stunning appointment. She was someone who was brought in specifically to help Starmer get things done in government. She was the one who knew how Whitehall works, right? Why did they get rid of her? They got rid of her because of McSweeney and his acolytes, right? And what's happened since? Nothing's improved. We've had bad decisions coming through. Now, okay, Sue Gray was still in place when the first of those bad decisions came through, granted. She wouldn't have stopped that. But what's also happened is Starmer is constantly complaining that he doesn't know how to get the civil, like he's going, well, the civil service is useless. It's not doing these things I want. You had someone who could explain to you how to get things done in Whitehall, and you got rid of her. So it's not realistic to get Sue Gray back. But Morgan McSweeney has skills. You want to lose those skills, but his skills are campaigning skills. So he needs to be in charge of Labour's campaign, which is a senior role. He just shouldn't be. He shouldn't be chief of staff. He's clearly unfit as a chief of staff for two reasons. First, his own political instincts are awful. Second, he's jammed number 10 full of like-minded people. That's fatal. Fatal. It's groupthink. Groupthink is the demise of every organisation. You've got to get people in with different views. If you cannot stand to have your own views challenged, then you shouldn't be making those appointments. So McSweeney, it's not like he needs to go. He needs to not be in that position. He needs to be in charge of the campaigns, is what I would say. Josiah, they're saying, speaking of terrible political instinct, sounds like Badenoch has put a foot in it by implying Starmer shouldn't have attended the NATO conference. Yes, my 1 o'clock video is on that very thing. Yes, Badenoch is... It's quite funny because you've got both Badenoch and Starmer who have both now demonstrated that they're not good at reading the room. But Starmer has multiple advantages over Badenoch. The first is that Starmer will deliver. There will be Labour will deliver in the next few years. We're going to see that. So he will, even if his communication stays bad, there will be that. Second, he recognises when at least something's not working. Now, he hasn't always then made the right decision to put it right because, like I say, as I don't know what's going on inside number 10. I mean, maybe we're all hassling McSweeney, and so just like Starmer is relying on McSweeney, maybe McSweeney is relying on people that he thinks are clever and are not that clever. So maybe McSweeney as chief of staff would be fine with different. There's maybe some other people in number 10 that I don't know about that are giving the bad advice. I don't know. But McSweeney is the one who's hired. Starmer's the one who's hired McSweeney. McSweeney is the one who's hired the others. So that's why McSweeney needs moving out. In terms of who should, David just asked who should be chief of staff. I have got no idea. I have no idea who would be suitable. Couldn't tell you. I have no experience of being involved in number 10 operations. I've never been inside number 10. The closest I've been is walking past the gates. So I have no idea. I couldn't possibly tell you who would make a good chief of staff. I just know that the operation, again, I'm not trying to pin everything on one person. The operation in number 10 collectively is failing. And there needs to be a fundamental rethink. Starmer can't sack McSweeney until he's worked out how to stop the latter leaking Starmer's news to the papers. I strongly suspect there are no such things. Also, again, there's no need to do to McSweeney what Johnson did to Dominic Cummings, right? There doesn't need to be a dumping of him as such. It's like being in charge of Labour's election campaign is still a very senior role. It should just be seen as a side grade, billed as a side grade. Oh, Morgan McSweeney, not a sacking. Morgan McSweeney is going to focus on the campaign more because he needs to spend more time on the campaign. And that means I'll need to get someone else. Do a face-saving way out of it. But something's got to change. When I get paid, they're saying Ed Miliband, Steve Reed have been star performers, in my opinion. There have been quite a few, I would say. I've been impressed with Jonathan Reynolds as well. There's quite a few others. Angela Rayner has been very good in terms of fighting her corner to getting all that funding for housing projects. But also, see, the thing is, when we come back to this number 10 operation, Pat McFadden, who's a very old hand, he's not a front of camera type person, so you may not really know much about him. If Starmer listened to him more, these mistakes wouldn't have happened. Now, I don't know what's been said behind closed doors, but McFadden is someone who is known to believe that there is a fundamental problem with the thinking in number 10, which there is. Because it may be, so when I made the point that a lot of these errors come from the Treasury, they've come from the Treasury ultimately. And you may think because the government have front-loaded their unpopular economic decisions early, that it should be much easier, not plain sailing, but much easier sailing over the next few years. The fact that there's a problem with thinking in number 10, and it has to be addressed. Otherwise, they risk these things keep happening. They can get away with them in the first year. They can get away with them. They can get away with a couple of missteps in the second year, but that's less. But as you're moving towards the next election, you've got to tackle these. There's going to be enough. There might be forced errors because, with Labour government, the media is always against them. They're always going to be against them. So, but these are unforced errors. Pat McFadden seems to be the one they roll out on the media rounds when there's been a balls up, says a lot. Really, well, that's because he's quite sensible. He would have better political instincts. Starmer should rely on his advice a bit more. He is in charge of the cabinet office. He's influential, and again, I don't know what he would have said about some of these moves originally, but it's hard to imagine he would have thought they were brilliant moves. And it's already it's going to be the case that, Reeves is obviously going to have to find significant amount more money now in the next budget statement. But these are mistakes that never should have happened. The winter fuel allowance, doing it in the way they did it, was politically stupid. The disability cuts, politically stupid. Even the inheritance tax, which it remains to be seen how damaging that will be. Just because the media and farmers have gone on about it doesn't mean to say it will be politically damaging. It might be. But it was also an unnecessary row, because there was a way for Reeves to raise just as much money without hitting farmers at all. In saying that she wouldn't have done that. A lot of the people I've been talking to are wondering if these concessions could be subject to legal challenge on the basis of the disparity between payment rates between new and existing claimants. Yes, I mean, I could certainly believe that. I mean, there could. I mean, there's very likely to be a legal challenge, you would think, anyway, because I mean that's quite normal anyway. It is normal to challenge the government on things. Yes. And maybe the government are conscious of that. Place was because they were slated for in a couple of years' time, and we know. So let's remember the real reason why these cuts are coming in. Never mind what Labour is saying in terms of helping people into work, because some of these people can't, and they know that. They said that. They've open about that. Some people can't work, they've said, and also some of these people affected are in work. How are you helping someone who's already employed into work? They're already in work. So the arguments made no sense. But they've also acknowledged that it's the costs. That's the real reason, the cost, right? So what's happened is they had a hole in the budget. The OBR would not give their budget a clean bill of health until that hole was plugged, right? They thought the path of least resistance was to... The path of least resistance in general is to restrict welfare payments, because welfare payments are not generally popular with a lot of key voters. And they thought that disability payments was the easiest way to do it for the amount of money they needed, right? That's what they've thought. They thought that was the easiest way to make the sums add up. But there was always a sort of hope that the reason they're doing this is because the OBR... Reeves believes that the OBR are underestimating economic growth, because as far as she's concerned, a lot of the things coming online, which the OBR can't take account of, like planning reforms, better deals with the EU, things like that, will grow the economy more, at which point that hole could, in theory, disappear. Now, I would say Trump's monkey business may counteract that. But nonetheless, that's the argument. So the argument could be that if the economy does grow as a result of some of these changes that the OBR are not taking account of because they can't, because they don't have the details, then maybe the whole issue goes away, and in a couple of years' time, all of a sudden they can find the money for it all again. But yes, I mean, that is a very good point about potential legal challenge, because it does create a situation where two people with absolutely identical circumstances, and one is deemed to need personal independence payments because they're a pre-existing claimant, and one of them is deemed not to need them because they claimed after a certain date. So yeah, I can see that ending up in the courts. Will I ever be able to listen to a conversation on Bethnal Green Road or Philondoney High Street that notices the Labour-led improvements? Yes, I've actually already seen, I mean, you know, in terms of I'm in a very gammon area, right? And I've already heard people who hate Labour, they're very pro-Tory stroke Reform UK, already giving Labour the credit on NHS improvements. So they've already been noticed in my area. Yes, they will. I'll tell you why. So first of all, the NHS will, I mean, remember, the NHS made improvements over winter. It should be impossible, just by basically getting doctors back to work. So they've already made improvements, and that's before any of the money's been spent. So the NHS will be significantly better. It won't be fixed by the end of the Parliament, but it'll be significantly better. There'll be building projects going up everywhere. When people see building projects, that to them means things are happening. That's always a very positive sign, as long as they're not still there 10 years later, right? So there'll be, even though some of the building projects will take longer than 4 or 5 years, the fact that people will see them, Labour will I mean, remember, legislation's still going through. Labour will have, they'll be able to talk about how many houses they've been building, how many affordable houses, how much extra social housing there is. You know, so yes, Labour will be, people will notice these things. And of course, these things will also generate jobs. And Labour are quite keen that a lot of those jobs are generated where it is most needed. Who's popping there saying, I don't think the money can be found, not with geopolitics the way it is at the moment. It will have to be found. But there we go. Paula doesn't seem to think McFadden's sensible. I think he is one of the more sensible members of the government. You say NHS improvements are a bit of a con. If you can get an appointment with the doctor quicker than you could, it's not a con. I mean, and people are noticing that. Who's popping there saying, since Labour came in last year, we've got 3 large housing developments within 3 miles of the police and CSOs patrolling on foot and in vehicles daily, sometimes more though. Yeah, I mean, we know that immediately Angela Rayner and Ed Miliband for housing and energy respectively unlocked some blocks on some projects. So we know that some projects were given immediate go ahead as soon as they came to power, but the planning reform should get a whole load more through. Now, again, I have my concerns about the planning reforms. I always have concerns about deregulation going too far. So we may in 10 years time look back and we might look at some developments and go, well, that didn't work out too well. But again, they've just, they feel that they have to show people rapid developments in infrastructure in order to win the next election. You say it's commonly not with a GP, more likely a PA or ACP, not medical qualified. No, in fact, the Department for Health and Social Care are acting on that PA stuff now. That is one thing they did actually tackle, this issue of sometimes physician associates being used and people not realising they're not actually doctors. They are actually tackling that properly. And in my case, I mean, I've had to see a GP several times in the last year and it's been a GP. But there we go. So there it is anyway. So we've gone through, I think, everything I need to talk about there. We're only doing half hours for these ones. Thanks very much for coming on. Yes, my 1 o'clock video will be on the Badenoch mess from yesterday. We'll see how that goes. We'll hopefully have more detail. Well, we will have more details next week because you know what? The welfare bill is going to be voted on. So we'll find out then, won't we? But there it is. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a great rest of day and weekend. And until next time, I'll see you later.